The call to arms Admiral Tay stood motionless at the massive viewport of the Confederation flagship, watching the stars. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep distress among his species. The holographic displays surrounding him showed the same grim data: another system lost to the Void Swarm, another 3 billion lives extinguished. "How many does that make?" asked Sub-Commander Rio quietly. 17 systems in the last cycle alone, replied Tay, his voice resonating with the harmonics of morning. The Nishiri homeworld fell yesterday. They had been spacefaring for 8,000 years. The Confederation Council Chamber had never felt so empty. Once filled with representatives from over 30 species, nearly a third of those seats now stood vacant, their civilizations reduced to refugee fleets and scattered survivors. "We have received word from the last outpost in the Cygnus Arm," said Rio. "They suggest the unthinkable." Tay turned slowly. "You mean the quarantined world?" "Earth. Yes." The word hung in the air like a forbidden spell. Earth had been cordoned off 3 centuries ago after Confederation scouts observed its inhabitants engaged in global warfare for the 5th time in their brief recorded history. The humans' capacity for violence had shocked even the most seasoned Confederation anthropologists. "They're barely into their space age," Tay protested. "And yet their military understanding exceeds our own," Rio countered. "The quarantine satellites have been monitoring their broadcasts. They've developed theories of warfare our academics never imagined, simply because our species evolved past conflict thousands of years ago." 3 days later, a small Confederation vessel broke the quarantine zone around Earth's solar system for the first time in centuries. The humans, to their credit, didn't shoot it down immediately. Instead, they escorted it to a facility in a place they called New Zealand. General Kim walked slowly around the alien craft, her weathered face betraying nothing of her thoughts. At 62, she had fought in the last 2 conflicts that had ravaged Earth before the unlikely peace of the past decade. The scars on her hands told that story clearly enough. "So," she said finally to the alien delegation, "you've been watching us all this time." Admiral Tay's translator rendered her words perfectly. "Yes, we had hoped your species would outgrow certain tendencies." Kim laughed, a sound that made the aliens flinch with its sharpness. "And now you need those tendencies, don't you? That's why you're here." The meeting lasted 14 hours. The aliens showed footage of the Void Swarm, collective intelligence that consumed everything in its path with mechanical precision. Kim showed them footage of Earth's early warning systems. The aliens were stunned. "You've been observing our war?" Tay asked. "We detected your platforms decades ago," Kim replied, pouring another cup of coffee. "Hacked into the feed. Been watching the slaughter for 3 years now. Your tactics are—" She searched for a diplomatic word. "Academic. We come from peaceful species," Tay said defensively. "And that's admirable," Kim nodded. "But peace doesn't prepare you for creatures that only understand destruction. You fight like engineers. They fight like predators." Back in her office, Kim accessed the secure bunker beneath the mountain complex. Row upon row of cryopods lined the walls, each containing a veteran soldier from the last war, volunteers who had chosen suspended animation over a world that had little use for their skills in peacetime. "Wake them," she told the technician. "Tell them I'm offering a deployment unlike anything they could imagine." 5 days later, 300 human soldiers stood in formation before the alien vessel. Men and women who had once fought each other now united under a new banner. They carried minimal gear. The aliens had promised to provide advanced equipment, but each veteran wore the patches of their former units with pride. Staff Sergeant Lee stepped forward, his face a roadmap of old conflicts. "General, the battalion is assembled and ready." Kim nodded. "These soldiers represent the best Earth has to offer, Admiral Tay. Not our technology. We know yours is superior. Not our numbers. We're sending only a small force to prove the concept. We're offering you our experience with something your people have forgotten, the art of war." Tay looked uncomfortable. Our analysts calculated that we would need at least 10,000 human warriors to make a difference. Your analysts, Lee interrupted, breaking protocol, think warfare is about numbers. It's not. It's about initiative, adaptation, psychological impact. He pointed to a soldier in the front row. That woman there survived alone behind enemy lines for 40 days. That man led a unit that took a fortress everyone said was impregnable. Kim watched the Admiral's reaction. We don't need to send an army, Admiral. We need to send teachers. Your forces have the tools, but not the mindset. My veterans will show your people how to think like warriors again. As the humans boarded the alien vessel, Lee paused beside Kim. They have no idea what's coming, do they? Neither does the enemy, Kim replied. And that's exactly the point. The ship lifted off, carrying the strangest fighting force the galaxy had ever seen, human veterans about to teach the stars how war was really fought. As Earth shrank behind them, the soldiers exchanged knowing glances. They had been called many things in their lives: heroes, killers, protectors, monsters. Now they had a new title: humanity's ambassadors to a war among the stars. And everything was about to change. The skeptics, the human soldiers, stood out sharply against the gleaming corridors of the Confederation flagship. Their worn faces and alert eyes scanned everything, noting defensive positions and exit routes by instinct. The aliens watched them with a mixture of hope and unease. Commander Park moved through the crowd of his fellow officers, his translucent skin flushing with barely contained frustration. His species, the Alani, prided themselves on logical thought and diplomatic solutions. The idea of bringing primitive warriors aboard their most advanced vessel seemed like desperation, which, he had to admit, it was. Admiral Tay has lost his senses, Park whispered to his aide. These creatures only developed space travel a century ago. What could they possibly teach us about fighting an enemy that has consumed half our worlds? Across the room, Sergeant Lee pretended not to notice the whispers. After 20 years of combat, he could read hostility in any species. The aliens tried to hide their discomfort, but their body language, extra limbs twitching, breathing organs, fluttering rapidly, told him everything. They're scared of us, he told General Kim quietly as they were led toward the command center. Not just of the enemy, Kim nodded. Fear can be useful if channeled correctly. The command center of the Confederation flagship was a marvel of technology. Three-dimensional star maps hovered in the air, tracking the void swarm's advance across the galaxy. Alien technicians from a dozen species monitored displays showing refugee movements, supply lines, and defensive positions. Admiral Tay gestured to the central hologram. The swarm will reach the Rigel defensive line within 14 days. We've positioned our remaining fleets to intercept them here and here. The hologram highlighted 2 star clusters. Commander Park stepped forward. Our simulations suggest we can expect a 70% loss of ships, but we may slow their advance by 8 to 10 days. The human veterans exchanged glances. Sergeant, Lee cleared his throat, a sound that made several aliens jump. You mind if I take a look? He asked, stepping toward the hologram without waiting for permission. He studied the display, eyes narrowing. You're fighting exactly how they expect you to fight. The command center went silent. Park's skin flushed darker. These strategies were developed by our finest tactical minds, he said coldly. Minds with access to technology your species can barely comprehend. Lee nodded. Great technology, but war isn't about having the best tools. It's about how you use them. He turned to a female soldier. Jin, what do you see? The woman stepped forward, her face bearing a scar from chin to temple. She had been a tank commander before the peace. They're not attacking your military targets. First, she said, pointing to the pattern of swarm movements. Look at the systems they've taken. They go for resources, then population centers. Your military installations are last. They're treating your fleets as an inconvenience, not a threat. Admiral Tay blinked his 4 eyes in sequence. This matches our observations. But how does this help us? Lee walked around the hologram, picking up a stylus from a nearby console. Without asking permission, He began drawing new lines of movement on the tactical display. "Stop that," Park protested. "Those systems are incredibly sensitive." Lee ignored him. "You're positioning your ships like this is a math problem. Warfare is psychological. You need to make them react to you, not the other way around." He pointed to a small outpost near the projected path of the swarm. "What's this?" A technician answered. "Outpost 47, a minor mining facility, minimal strategic value." "That's your target," Lee said firmly. "Not the big defensive line you're preparing." Park laughed, a musical sound despite his derision. "You suggest we abandon our major defensive positions to protect a mining outpost?" "I suggest you start thinking like your enemy," Lee countered. "They consume resources. Based on their attack pattern, this outpost processes exactly what they want. And they think you don't value it because it's not a military target." "Admiral." Tay studied the display thoughtfully. "Commander Park, run a simulation based on Sergeant Lee's suggestion." Park's protest died on his lips as the Admiral's tone made it clear this was not a request. The aliens worked their controls, and the hologram shifted to show a new battle projection. The results surprised everyone except the humans. The simulation showed the swarm diverting significant forces to crush any defense of the mining outpost, creating vulnerabilities elsewhere. "This can't be right," Park insisted. "They've never shown this behavior pattern before." "Because you've never threatened something they truly wanted," General Kim explained. "You've been fighting the war they want you to fight." Lee picked up a handful of small data chips from a nearby workstation and arranged them on the hologram table. "Let me show you something we learned the hard way on Earth." He set up the chips in a standard battle formation, then showed how a smaller force could devastate it through flanking maneuvers, feints, and ambushes. The aliens watched in fascination as Lee demonstrated concepts their civilization had evolved past centuries ago: deception, misdirection, sacrifice plays. "War isn't noble," Lee told them bluntly. "It's dirty and cruel and unfair. And if you want to win, you need to be willing to fight unfair too." An uncomfortable silence fell over the command center. These concepts went against everything the Confederation species believed about themselves. But the steady advance of the swarm on their displays told them their beliefs might be a luxury they could no longer afford. Admiral Tay finally broke the silence. "How soon can your warriors be ready for deployment?" "We're already ready," Lee said. "Question is, are you ready for what happens next?" General Kim watched the faces of the alien command staff. Some showed revulsion, others curiosity. A few, the ones whose home planets had already fallen, showed something else. The first glimmer of understanding that survival sometimes required embracing the darker parts of one's nature. "When the battle starts," she told them quietly, "everything changes. Be prepared for that. First contact." The alert came 3 days earlier than predicted. The Void Swarm had accelerated their approach to the Rigel defensive line, moving with an efficiency that shocked even the Confederation analysts. Emergency klaxons echoed through the flagship as alien crew members rushed to battle stations with practiced precision. General Kim watched the chaos from the observation deck, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. 20 years of combat had taught her that battle plans rarely survived first contact with the enemy. The Confederation forces, for all their technology, didn't understand this fundamental truth. "They're deploying the main fleet exactly as planned," she murmured to Sergeant Lee, who stood beside her studying the tactical displays. "Even though the enemy arrival time has changed." Lee nodded. "They think war is an equation. If they just follow the formula, they'll get the right answer." On the command deck below, Commander Park was directing the defensive formation. The elegant alien moved with confidence, issuing orders that sent thousands of ships into predetermined positions. The Confederation's battle doctrine was being followed to the letter. "The mining outpost at Sector 47 is requesting additional support," reported a communications officer. "They're detecting swarm scout vessels in their vicinity." Park barely glanced at the report. "Denied. All ships maintain primary defensive positions as outlined in Protocol Delta." Admiral Tay, standing nearby, looked troubled. The humans suggested the outpost would be a primary target. With respect, Admiral, Park replied smoothly. We cannot divert resources based on the hunches of primitive warriors. Our simulations clearly show the swarm will target our main fleet first. In the hangar bay below, the human soldiers were already moving. Without authorization, they were boarding the small fleet of interceptors assigned to them. Veteran pilots checked unfamiliar controls while ground troops secured their advanced weaponry. What are you doing? Demanded a Confederation security officer, hurrying into the hangar. You have not been given deployment orders. Jin, the former tank commander, snapped the final seal on her combat suit. We're going to Outpost 47. Impossible. Commander Park has denied that request. Jin smiled grimly. We didn't request anything. Back on the observation deck, Kim's communicator beeped. She listened for a moment, then turned to Lee. Our people are moving. Right on schedule. Lee nodded, unsurprised. Park and his kind will learn soon enough. You can make all the plans you want, but wars are won by the soldiers who adapt fastest when those plans fall apart. Admiral Tay appeared beside them, his four eyes blinking, rapidly in agitation. Your warriors have commandeered vessels without authorization. They're heading for the mining outpost against direct orders. Yes, Kim replied calmly. They are. This is mutiny. Commander Park is furious. This is warfare, Lee corrected, and Park's fury won't matter much when the swarm proves us right. The first reports of contact came 90 minutes later. The Ruway, Confederation's main fleet, engaged with swarm forces exactly where their simulations had predicted. The aliens took comfort in this verification of their models until they realized they were fighting only a fraction of the expected swarm numbers. Where are the rest of them? Park demanded, scanning the tactical displays in confusion. Our intelligence indicated 3 times this force. The answer came moments later from Outpost 47. The small mining facility was under massive attack. The bulk of the swarm had bypassed the main defensive line completely and headed straight for the resource-rich outpost. Just as the humans predicted, Tay said quietly. Park's skin paled to near transparency. The outpost has minimal defenses. They'll be overrun in minutes. Perhaps not, Tay replied, pointing to a new set of indicators on the tactical display. The small fleet of human-piloted interceptors had arrived at the outpost. Against all tactical logic, they were engaging a force that outnumbered them 20-1. The Confederation command staff watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. The human pilots flew in patterns that made no sense according to Confederation doctrine. They separated instead of maintaining formation. They flew directly at enemy vessels instead of maintaining optimal firing distance. They used the mining facility's structures as cover and ambush points. What are they doing? Whispered an analyst. These maneuvers aren't in any tactical database. They're fighting dirty, Kim explained, stepping onto the command deck. Something your people forgot how to do centuries ago. The tactical displays showed the unthinkable. The human forces were holding their ground. More than that, they were pushing the swarm back from key sections of the outpost. The aliens watched in disbelief as humans executed maneuvers that centuries of Confederation tactical doctrine had declared impossible or irrational. They're taking terrible risks, Park said, his voice wavering between condemnation and awe. They're creating confusion, Kim corrected. The swarm is a hive mind that calculates probabilities. It expects rational opponents. My people are deliberately being unpredictable. As the battle progressed, the swarm's coordinated attack began to fragment. Individual swarm ships seemed to hesitate, their perfect formations breaking down as they tried to respond to the chaotic human assault. For the first time in the 3-year war, the Void Swarm appeared uncertain. Outpost 47 reports 60% of their attackers have been repelled, announced a communications officer, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. The station's core infrastructure remains intact. Admiral Tay turned to Kim. How are 300 humans accomplishing what thousands of our warriors could not? Kim's eyes remained fixed on the battle display. Because your people fight wars, mine live them. The command deck fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. The Confederation species had evolved past violence in their own societies, viewing warfare as a regrettable necessity to be approached with scientific detachment. Humans, for all their shorter history, understood war at a primal level. Send reinforcements to Outpost 47, Tay ordered suddenly. All available ships. Commander Park started to object, then stopped himself as he watched the tactical display. The evidence was undeniable. Somehow these primitive humans had identified the swarm's true target and were successfully defending it against overwhelming odds. And, Tay continued, his voice carrying a new edge of determination, I want every commander in the fleet to observe and record the human combat techniques. It seems we have much to learn. As the order was relayed, Lee turned to Kim. Phase 1 complete, he said quietly. Now comes the hard part. What's that? Asked Tay, overhearing. Lee met the alien admiral's four-eyed gaze steadily. Teaching your people to embrace the warrior inside them, without losing themselves to it, the human element. The battle footage played on a continuous loop in the Confederation war room. Admiral Tay had watched it 17 times now, studying every detail of how the human forces had defended Outpost 47. Each viewing revealed something new, something his centuries-old civilization had forgotten or never known. Slow it down here, he instructed the technician, pointing to a moment when a human pilot had cut power to his engines, allowing his ship to drift while maintaining weapons lock on a swarm vessel. The maneuver had violated every principle of Confederation flight doctrine, yet it had worked brilliantly. They call it playing dead, said General Kim, entering the war room quietly. An old hunting technique from Earth. Predators often ignore prey that appears lifeless. Tay's four eyes blinked in sequence. But the swarm isn't a natural predator. It's a collective intelligence. That operates on pattern recognition, Kim pointed out. Break the pattern, confuse the mind. Across the flagship, in converted cargo bays and training areas, human veterans were working with selected Confederation forces. The process wasn't going smoothly. Centuries of evolutionary and cultural development had left most alien species ill-suited for the aggressive, instinctive combat style that humans employed. In Training Bay 3, Jin watched in frustration as a group of Alani pilots once again formed a perfect geometric formation during the simulation. No, 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 she said, shutting down the program. You're still flying like you're on parade. The swarm will predict every move you make. An Alani pilot named Tal raised a delicate hand. But Formation Theta 6 maximizes our defensive coverage while optimizing firing solutions. It also gets you killed, Jin replied bluntly. You're still treating this like a math problem. She restarted the simulation, climbing into the instructor's pod. Watch me, then copy exactly what I do. The aliens observed as Jin's simulated fighter deliberately broke formation, flew erratically, and used maneuvers that seemed to serve no logical purpose until the simulated swarm ships began to miss their targeting solutions. She appears to be malfunctioning, one Alani whispered to another. She appears to be winning, corrected a third, whose homeworld had fallen to the swarm the previous year. He stepped forward. I would like to try. In another section of the ship, Sergeant Lee worked with ground combat specialists from 3 different species. The challenge was even greater here. Many Confederation species had evolved past physical aggression entirely, with some lacking even the biological capacity for quick, violent movement. You're overthinking it, Lee told a frustrated Malosian, soldier whose forearms moved with elegant but ineffective precision. Stop trying to calculate the perfect strike and just hit me. But if I strike with optimal force, I might cause injury, protested the Malosian. Lee sighed. That's the point of combat. Nearby, a small group of Krivari fighters showed more promise. Their species had evolved as pack hunters before developing intelligence, and something of that instinct remained. They caught on quickly to concepts like flanking maneuvers and covering fire. These ones might actually survive a real fight, Lee muttered to himself. In the command center, Commander Park studied reports from the training sessions with growing concern. Admiral, these humans are teaching our people to abandon centuries of tactical development. The techniques they promote seem chaotic, and yet, Tay replied mildly, They succeeded where our carefully calculated approaches failed. Park's skin flushed with emotion. They were fortunate. One victory doesn't validate their primitive methods. Then explain this, Tay said, bringing up a new set of statistics. Since implementing human suggestions, our scout ships have reported a 28% increase in successful engagements with swarm patrols. The numbers were difficult to argue with, even for Park. Across multiple fronts, Confederation forces that had adopted human tactics were showing improved survival rates and combat effectiveness. General Kim joined them carrying a data pad. Your people are learning, but too slowly, she said without preamble. The swarm will reach the Arcturus Junction in 5 days. If it falls, 3 of your remaining core worlds will be cut off. We're aware, Park replied stiffly. We're deploying our reserves to reinforce the junction defenses. Another head-on confrontation? Kim asked. Our forces outnumber the projected swarm fleet by nearly 2 to 1 at that location. Kim exchanged a glance with Lee, who had just entered the command center. Show them, she said. Lee placed a small projector on the table. It displayed historical footage from Earth's military history. Ancient battles where smaller forces defeated, larger ones through deception, terrain advantage, and psychological warfare. This is from a place called Thermopylae, Lee explained, showing Greek forces holding a narrow pass. And this is the Battle of Agincourt, where a few thousand defeated, many times their number. He flipped through more examples. Guerrilla fighters ambushing mechanized columns, naval battles won through weather knowledge, modern special forces neutralizing larger conventional armies. Throughout our history, we've learned that superior numbers mean nothing if your enemy dictates the terms of engagement, Lee concluded. We don't need to match the swarm ship for ship. We need to change how they think. Admiral Tay watched the historical records with fascination. Your species has been fighting itself for most of your history. Yes, Kim acknowledged. It's not something we're proud of. But it taught us lessons your people never had to learn. Like what? Asked a junior officer who had been listening intently. Like knowing when to break the rules, Lee replied. When to take a calculated risk. When to sacrifice a position to win the larger fight. Park made a sound of disapproval. These concepts contradict our entire philosophical approach to conflict resolution. Exactly, said Kim. And that's why you've been losing this war. The swarm doesn't share your philosophy. It adapts, it learns. It's been studying how your forces respond for 3 years. She turned to Admiral Tay. We don't need to win every battle immediately. We just need to change how your people fight. Introduce enough human unpredictability that the swarm can no longer predict your movements. Throughout the flagship, the process Kim described was already happening. In small groups, certain Confederation warriors were embracing human combat doctrines. Most struggled with concepts like acceptable losses or fighting dirty, but as Lee had predicted, those whose worlds had faced direct swarm attack learned fastest. A young Krivari officer approached Lee after a training session. My home moon fell to the swarm last cycle, she said quietly. I watched the evacuation ships being destroyed one by one. Our defenders followed all protocols perfectly. And the swarm knew exactly what you would do, Lee guessed. She nodded, her ridge of sensing organs flattening in remembered grief. Teach me everything, even the parts your own people find disturbing. Lee studied her for a moment. The hardest part isn't learning to fight like us, he warned. It's remembering who you are afterward. As the Confederation fleet prepared for the battle at Arcturus Junction, Admiral Tay made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. He placed human advisors with every major combat unit. Some, like Commander Park, protested. Others welcomed the edge these primitive but effective warriors might provide. You're changing us, Tay told Kim, privately. For better or worse, your warriors are awakening something long dormant in my people. Kim watched as mixed teams of humans and aliens ran combat drills on the hangar deck below. Just remember the most important lesson, she said. The difference between humans and monsters isn't that we lack darkness inside us. What is it then? Este. It's that we've learned when to leash that darkness once the fighting stops. Everything changes. The Arcturus junction hung like a cosmic crossroads. Against the backdrop of twin nebulae, strategic maps identified it as Transit Point 989b, but human soldiers had renamed it the Choke Point. Its gravity wells and mineral-rich asteroid fields made it the only viable passage between three star systems, and the perfect place for an ambush. 2 days before the swarm's projected arrival, the Confederation fleet performed an unprecedented maneuver. They vanished. Observer drones left by retreating civilian transports recorded only empty space where the massive defensive fleet should have been. The swarm's advanced scouts arrived 12 hours later, their sensor arrays probing the seemingly abandoned junction with mechanical precision. Hidden in the magnetic shadow of a gas giant's fourth moon, Admiral Tay and Commander Park watched the tactical display with barely contained tension. Around them, the bridge crew maintained complete communication silence. "They're proceeding exactly as the humans predicted," Park whispered, his translucent skin flushing with reluctant respect. Tay nodded. The decision to adopt the human battle plan had not come easily. It had required him to override centuries of Confederation military doctrine and trust the instincts of warriors from a quarantined world. If this gamble failed, 3 core worlds would fall within days. In the hangar bay, Sergeant Lee checked his equipment one final time. Around him, mixed squads of human veterans and alien warriors prepared for close-quarter combat operations. The plan was unlike anything the Confederation had attempted before. Rather than engaging the swarm in conventional space battle, teams would use stealth shuttles to board and capture key enemy vessels. Jin approached, her battle armor showing signs of recent repairs. "The Krivari and Malosian teams are ready," she reported. "The others are still struggling with the concept of shoot first, ask questions never." Lee nodded. "They'll learn fast when the shooting starts." "If this works," Jin said quietly, "everything changes for them. For us too." Lee understood her meaning. Humanity had been quarantined because of their violent tendencies. Now those same tendencies might save the galaxy. What would that mean for Earth's future relationship with these advanced species? General Kim's voice crackled through their comms. "Swarm main fleet approaching final marker. All teams prepare for Phase 1. Throughout the hidden Confederation fleet, warriors tensed for battle. The human plan divided forces into 3 unconventional groups. The Ghost Fleet remained hidden, weapons cold. The Bait Team operated damaged and seemingly abandoned ships, placed strategically throughout the junction. And the Strike Teams waited in stealth shuttles, ready to board enemy vessels. As the main swarm fleet entered the junction, they detected the apparently crippled Confederation ships. Following their programmed behavior, they diverted smaller vessels to consume these easy targets. Phase 1 initiated, Kim reported from the command ship. Bait taken. The first swarm harvesters approached a drifting Confederation cruiser, extending mechanical tendrils to begin the consumption process. They detected no life signs, no active defense systems, only valuable resources. What they couldn't detect were the strike teams hidden within, their life signs masked by technology adapted from human stealth operations. "Wait for it," Lee whispered to his mixed team of humans and aliens as they felt the swarm vessel latch onto their ship. "Remember, they don't expect resistance from inside." The docking mechanism finished with a metallic groan. Lee looked at the nervous alien warriors beside him, species that had evolved past violence now holding weapons designed by humans. "Now," he ordered. Across the junction, 6 strike teams breached into swarm vessels simultaneously. The human veterans led the way, their movements efficient and brutal. The swarm, designed to fight organized fleet actions, had no protocols for internal defenders. On the command ship, Admiral Tay watched the tactical display as strike team signals penetrated the swarm formation. "Phase 2, he ordered. "Deploy." Ghost Fleet. From behind moons within asteroid fields and from the cover of radiation clouds, the main Confederation fleet revealed itself. But rather than forming the traditional geometric battle formations, they emerged in an apparently random, pattern designed by human tacticians to create maximum confusion. They look disorganized, Park noted with lingering disapproval. They look unpredictable, Kim corrected. Which is exactly the point. The swarm responded to the sudden appearance of the Ghost Fleet by shifting to its standard attack configuration, A2AE, response that had destroyed countless Confederation ships in previous encounters. But this time, the Confederation vessels didn't counter with their own standard defense. Instead, they executed what General Kim had called a broken pattern approach, seeming to flee in disorder while actually moving into precisely calculated firing positions. Within seconds of engagement, the carefully orchestrated chaos yielded results. Swarm vessels, attempting to predict enemy movements based on previous encounters, found themselves firing at empty space while taking hits from unexpected angles. Inside the swarm command vessel, Lee's strike team fought their way toward the central processing node. The alien warriors with him were learning quickly, adapting human combat techniques to their own physiologies. A Kravari soldier used her forearms to wield twice the firepower of a human, while a Melosian's natural speed made him virtually untouchable in close combat. Almost there, Lee called, checking the captured swarm schematics displayed on his helmet visor. Remember, once we reach the node, we have 90 seconds to upload the virus before the system purges. The virus, another human innovation, was designed not to destroy the swarm but to introduce microsecond delays into its decision-making process. Just enough hesitation to disrupt its perfect coordination. On the tactical display of the command ship, Admiral Tay watched as the battle unfolded like nothing he had witnessed in 3 years of war. The swarm's movements, normally fluid and synchronized, began to show signs of confusion. Ships that should have formed perfect attack patterns lagged or moved in contradictory directions. It's working, he breathed. Their hive mind is losing coordination. Phase 3, ordered Kim. All ships execute hammer and anvil. The Confederation fleet, which had appeared to be in chaotic retreat, suddenly reversed course in perfect unison. The seemingly random positioning now revealed its true purpose. The swarm fleet had been drawn into a three-dimensional encirclement. As the Confederation ships closed from all directions, the swarm found itself caught in a closing net. Lee's team reached the central node, a pulsing crystalline structure that served as the local control hub for the swarm fleet. 2 human soldiers fell securing the chamber, their sacrifices creating the opening needed for the Melosian tech specialist to reach the interface. Uploading virus, the alien reported, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. 3 months ago he had been a theoretical mathematician. Now he was a warrior, fighting alongside humans to save what remained of his civilization. Throughout the junction, the other strike teams reported similar success. One by one, swarm command vessels received the virus, their perfect coordination degrading with each passing second. Withdrawal signals detected in swarm fleet, reported a sensor officer on the command ship. They're retreating. A stunned silence fell over the bridge. In 3 years of war, no one had seen the swarm retreat. They consumed or were destroyed, but they never abandoned a target. The tactical display confirmed it. Swarm vessels were breaking off engagement, their formation dissolving into individual ships seeking escape vectors. The junction, and the 3 core worlds beyond it, would hold. As the strike teams extracted from their targets, the full extent of their victory became clear. The swarm had lost nearly 40% of its attacking force, while Confederation casualties remained under 15%. By any standard, it was a decisive victory. Hours later, Admiral Tay found General Kim on an observation deck, watching as repair ships tended to damaged vessels against the backdrop of the nebulae. In seconds, Tay said quietly, your warriors entered the battle and everything changed. Kim nodded. That's how it always is with humans. We adapt faster than anyone expects, for better or worse. The Council is meeting to discuss the quarantine of Earth. Tay continued. After today, I cannot imagine it will remain in place. Be careful what you wish for, Kim replied with a hint of warning. Humanity has much to offer the galaxy, but our history is complicated. As is our future, Tay acknowledged. Your warriors have awakened something in my people that has slumbered for millennia. I find myself both grateful and concerned. Together they watched as a mixed group of human and alien soldiers walked past the observation window, laughing and trading stories of the battle. The boundaries between species seemed to have blurred, united by the shared experience of combat. Your people taught mine to reach for the stars peacefully, Kim said at last. Perhaps mine can teach yours how to defend what you've built when peace isn't an option. And afterward, Tay asked. When the fighting ends, what then? Kim smiled, thinking of Earth's long, painful journey from endless war toward an uneasy peace. Then comes the hardest part, learning to put away the sword without forgetting how to use it. As the Confederation fleet regrouped, preparing to take the fight to swarm territory for the first time, a new understanding spread throughout the ranks. Victory was possible. The enemy could be beaten. And sometimes the most primitive instincts, tempered by wisdom and restraint, were exactly what an advanced civilization needed to survive. In the ship's medical bay, Lee sat beside a wounded Krivari soldier he had pulled to safety during the extraction. You fought well today, he told her, like you'd been doing it your whole life. I followed your example, she replied, but I have a question that troubles me. Ask it. After we win this war, she said, her sensing organs rippling with concern, how do we stop ourselves from becoming like you were, always fighting even among ourselves? Lee thought of Earth's blood-soaked history, of the hard lessons humanity had learned through centuries of conflict. That, he said quietly, is the question we're still answering ourselves.